Welcome to another edition of Dad's Divorce Live. I'm Matt Allen, editor of DadsDivorce.com. Today's guest is Michelle Skeen, who has a doctorate in clinical psychology and is the author of The Critical Partner, How to End the Cycle of Criticism and Get the Love You Want. Now, this book is about getting to the root of the problem when you are in a relationship with a critical partner who is defined as someone who constantly blames you and holds you to unrealistic standards, which I'm sure a lot of our audience can relate to. And the book is also about how you can build a more supportive partnership. Now, you can learn more about Michelle, the book, and her work by visiting the website michelleskeen.com. So, Michelle, first off, I want to ask you, this book talks not only about your partner's need to criticize, but also about what makes a person vulnerable to criticism. So are you suggesting that this isn't just an issue of one person being critical for no reason, but rather both parties are partly responsible?
Both parties are locked in a maladaptive, dysfunctional cycle that they can't figure out how to get out of, and that is having a negative impact on the relationship. And I think that one of the keys to understanding why this happens is to use, I've used the schema theory as a framework for understanding why we're drawn into these, partner selections or patterns of behavior. So a schema is a core belief about yourself that develops in childhood and adolescence as a result of interactions with parents, siblings, peers, other family members, and they form our belief about ourselves and our worldview and how we interact with others and what our emotional reactions are to situations.
So how do you...
So in the case of the vulnerable partner, they are surrendering to their schema. And in the case of the critical partner, they're overcompensating for their schema. So through the assessment in the book, you can determine what your partner's schema is. And there are 5 primary schemas for the critical partner: emotional deprivation, entitlement, mistrust, abuse, abandonment, defectiveness, and shame. Now, in the case of the vulnerable partner, there are 4 of the same schemas. The vulnerable partner does not have the entitlement schema. Instead, they have a subjugation schema. But there are 4 schemas that are the same, and yet they look very different, because in the case of the vulnerable partner, they are behaving in a way that is reinforcing their schema. And in the case of the critical partner, their overcompensation behavior looks like they're behaving the opposite of what they believe their schema is. So in the case of a defectiveness and shame schema, the critical partner would be coming across as perfect while being very critical of others around him or her. And in the case of the defectiveness and shame schema for the vulnerable partner, they would criticize, put themselves down, and be attracted to critical or rejecting partners.
Now, I've heard you mention before that the criticized male partner in the relationship is often overlooked. Why is that?
Well, I feel like there's some shame around it. I think that it's maybe difficult for a man to acknowledge that he is with a woman who is putting him down. And, as roles in our society change and genders start to blur, I think that, we still hang on to these traditional gender roles of the man being the strong one and the woman being, supportive, and the man being more dominant and the woman being more submissive. And I think what's happened is you're seeing a lot of women who are very dominant and in many instances very critical.
So I guess, how do you deal with the critical partner then? What, I guess, coping methods are available to the vulnerable partner?
Right. Well, I think that, I mean, ideally, the critical partner would get in touch with the fact that they are critical. But in the case of a critical partner who is unable to acknowledge their role in the relationship, I do think it's possible for the vulnerable partner to make changes unilaterally. And I think we've all had this experience where we have, we run into someone who's in a bad mood and is, negative, whether it's the checkout person at the checkout counter. And if we respond to them in a like manner, it's going to escalate the situation. But if we respond in a more positive way, or don't allow ourselves to get emotionally escalated in a negative way, then we can alter the outcome of the dynamic and the interaction.
So finally, when people are finished reading this book, what will they be able to accomplish? What do you hope your readers get out of the book?
Well, I feel like knowledge is power. And I think that in the case of the schema framework, that if you can understand more about yourself and you can understand more about even why you were with this person, maybe you want to stay with them, maybe you're not with them anymore, but there's a reason that you were drawn to them. And Jeffrey Young, who's the architect of schema theory, has this, calls this schema chemistry, where you have a really high affect when you're around someone who feels really familiar to you. And so we're often drawn to, maybe in the case of, someone who had a really critical father, they tend to be drawn to someone, this idea of cognitive consistency, that is familiar to them, even if it's unhealthy. They know what to expect. They know how to deal with this type of person. And yet their coping behavior may not be healthy for them.
Well, Michelle, I want to thank you very much for joining me today, and best of luck with your book.
Thanks for having me on, Matt, and for my first Skype session.
That was Michelle Skeen, who is the author of The Critical Partner, How to End the Cycle of Criticism and Get the Love You Want. You can learn more about her by visiting her website, michelleskeen.com. That'll do it for this edition of Dad's Divorce Live. I'm Matt Allen, editor of DadsDivorce.com.